make it. So Madison and Heather, and then 8 didn't respond. So probably Tracy had to work during this time.
Well, like if Madison and Heather came and then it's me and I'd at least that'd be 4 out of the 7 committee members. That
Right.
was pretty decent.
We are live now. We're
Okay.
live now. Okay.
Well, welcome everybody to the subcommittee on assessment and performance. I think Kim's going to share the screen. We included a lot of the slides from last time just to kind of review. So you can see membership there. There was a little bit of juggling around. And so we did ask Heather Smith to join us, especially given the fact that she's a math teacher and her background, and she had agreed. So it's a little bit of a change in terms of overall membership. And then if we can go on to scope of work, our job is to make recommendations regarding the math subtest data, present that to the full commission at some point this spring. We talked about March, but we can talk more about that. Okay, we can move on. The next one is just about legislation, that there has to be, there's Madison. Great. Welcome, Madison. The legislative requirement is just elementary ed and special ed general curriculum teachers must have prescribed minimum scores on subtests related to both reading and math. And then if you go on to the next one, we did gather feedback from PSUs and EPPs in monthly meetings, the HR meeting and the EPP webinars. We did last time we looked together at the feedback that we had gotten. There were 23 responses. So we looked at that together. Kim went ahead and left on the slide with some of the math data feedback, just in case folks wanted to look back again at the kinds of feedback we had gotten. And then if you go to the next slide, that gets us to where we were with homework. We asked everyone to really look back at the PDF, the analysis of data, look back at all the feedback we had gotten thus far, and for each of us to kind of, based on all of that review, put our own thoughts in regarding those recommendations and where we thought that we landed. So on that next slide, that gets at our homework responses. So this here is a good solid summary of what the subcommittee had to say. So we had recommendation of lower math sub-test cut score, providing more options for meeting the requirement, like EdTPA is a possible option. There is discussion around that. One of the things that some of us from EPPs had mentioned, I don't have a real good sense of overall across the state, and I'm not sure if Andrew does either, but a lot to potentially most of the LED programs to do the literacy option for EdTPA rather than the math option. So that's something to consider. But that was mentioned, NISA's performance data, Praxis Core Math Assessment plus EdTPA, or Praxis Core Math Assessment plus Performance and Methods courses, and then EVOS data. So those were some of the options mentioned. Another comment was training and understanding and implementing the academic standards, particularly in math. Classroom performance when holding an emergency license or permit to teach. Allowing a selection of different tests, so things like a different praxis, something similar to national boards test. Test prep was mentioned, eliminating the mandate to pass the math test, instead providing it as an opportunity to raise starting pay. And that was mentioned kind of a little bit in another place. It was mentioned, there is the option to, based on a combination of GPA and performance on EdTPA, there is an option for a salary supplement currently in place. And there's Anne. Hey, Anne.
Hi.
And then the last two, better align math assessment with teaching expectations of meets or exceeds and NESIS. And then the last one, eliminating the math assessment requirement as it doesn't support student outcomes and consider what could replace the exam. And that's a comment about a TPA not exactly being a demonstration of content knowledge. I think it is, but the goal of a TPA is performance of, which you certainly need content knowledge to be performing in, but not necessarily with that main purpose in mind is the best way to say that. And again, a lot of those programs focus on literacy rather than math. So that's something that we'd have to think about. So that's an overall summary. Madison and Ida, I don't know if you guys want to have anything to say about kind of the feedback you gave or discussion of these. Just in general feedback.
This is Ida. I just discussed it with the leadership team at my district and just listened for their thoughts and ideas because I didn't feel, just my opinion was not what was needed. And so the feedback that I put down was definitely from our district leadership.
Because we're I'm in a charter school, have a little bit different of a situation. We don't tend to have a whole lot of hires, especially since we're virtual, that necessarily have to go through the whole process. Like in the way that like we're looking at it as far as like making changes and whatnot. So I don't have a ton of feedback to offer this time around.
One of my big concerns about thinking about Praxis Core is that we've worked really hard to make recommendations to not have Praxis Core be a requirement given a whole host of other data points. And so I'm reticent about having that be a part of a recommendation kind of moving forward. And Anne, I don't know about your program, your LED program and EdTPA, but what EdTPA they do for that program?
We do math.
You do math. Okay.
We do math only. Because we feel like the Pearson literacy is a strong indicator. And therefore they focus on that through our 3 literacy courses. And, that's what that's preparing them for. So there's a real clear alignment there. But for EdTPA, I wonder if one option could be to adopt the EdTPA math across, since Pearson and the Foundations of Reading, we know there is a correlation between that. I'm wondering if we went the other way with EdTPA, what that would do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Andrew, I don't know if you have a sense of this or anybody else. I don't have a good sense of across the state what people are doing. That might be something we'd really need to collect that information. Because it's one thing to say, well, most of the programs have a year-long, if we're talking about traditional undergraduate program, have a year-long internship. You could have the option to do both. Well, that's also a pretty big expense for students as well, if that cost is being passed along to students to add that. And I also would be concerned about adding that additional requirement. And then there's still the lingering question of, would that be accepted?
Let me see if I understand the question that you're asking of me. So you're wondering if we could collect sort of a consensus from the field as to which test they're taking?
Well, so if LED programs and general curriculum programs, ours all do the literacy at TPA.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a good sense across the state of, is that true and more or more like Anne's program where they've chosen math? I don't have a sense of who does which one.
So I'm sorry, Dr. Winter, are you getting the data collection what are you doing? What are you doing in terms of your support of elementary ed candidates, or specifically, do we want to know from all EPPs what you do to support your elementary ed and ECGC teachers in mathematics in terms of the testing requirement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be good information to know. I don't want to say I think that would not be good. I think it's good information to know. But when you choose the Ed TPA focus, you could choose to have math as a focus or literacy as a focus, and ours all do the literacy focus. And so if that became the option, if we didn't make that change as an EPP or other EPPs didn't make that change, ours really wouldn't be a measure of math content knowledge because their focus on Ed TPA is literacy. Does that make more sense? I mean, I still think what you're saying is good information to have, but we were just kind of talking about not knowing what EPPs do there.
Dr. Winter, so for that particular bullet point, they're saying to provide more options. So it would be an additional option if they wanted to choose
Okay.
the Ed TPA, I guess, and the math instruction. But I don't have a sense either as far as if they only use literacy or math. I've heard literacy from some programs, but that's not necessarily across the board.
I can't tell from the dashboard.
I don't have the dashboard in front of me, but maybe Andrew can look at that.
I don't think so. So this is news to me. For elementary ed, you can take a literacy Ed TPA or a math Ed TPA.
That's
Or a
right.
combo. Or
Or
a combo,
combo.
Tom.
Uh-huh.
So we used to do, when I first started, I don't remember what we did because that seems like a long time ago. But then we used to do math with the literacy fourth task. And a couple of years ago, I'm like, we're not doing that anymore. Like I suggested that we vote not to do that anymore because I'm like, we have this Pearson test. It's the foundations of reading. Let's go. And the reason we went to math is because we didn't think our math was where it needed to be. So it made us put focus on it.
Right.
And then the literacy already had focus. So I'm personally not comfortable with any recommendations that say anything about praxis core.
Me too. I feel pretty strongly about that.
Me too. Especially because
yeah. And and what you just said, what you guys do, I think there's good evidence to support that. And, we've been doing Ed TPA since it was still in pilot mode. 2012 is when we started. And, all along we would look across those 15 rubrics for the ones that have that many and really focus in, like, we've not done well on section 3. Let's back map curriculum, figure that out. We use the data and we really saw improvements. And so, in theory, I think that way of thinking about it makes good sense.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, when we looked at this data when we were in person in December, weren't the math scores were the ones that there was such a big disconnect with, correct? Between like the different subgroups when we broke it down. If I'm remembering correctly.
I'd say that again. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When we were in person in December, the math scores were the ones that were the really like scary discrepancy. Like they were the scores that had the big differences in them, right? Between the different, like who went Ed TPA versus who was licensure versus who was like in a classroom teaching, right? It was the math scores that we were all kind of like, whoa.
The math scores on the content licensure exam, whether you're talking, the Pearson has fallen out of favor quite a bit in relation to the Praxis CKT. But those pass rates are not good for all tracks. They're better for traditional, I think, than alternative, but nobody's really killing it.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I just want to make sure making sure my brain was remembering it was math that was so kind of like, whoa.
And we also
there's a-
looked at data that suggested lowering the cut score didn't
Right,
necessarily yield better results, right?
right, right.
That's right. You're going to get when you lower the cut score, my recollection is you do get more people get in, but you're tipping the scale more to the less effective teachers than you are bringing in more effective teachers. Or it's a wash. I think it was a wash. Like, since the test doesn't tell us anything about the eventual effectiveness of the teacher, lowering the test score is basically going to bring in the same number of ineffective versus effective teachers into the pool.
Right. I remember that too. It was like a 5 or 4 person like it wasn't enough of a difference to be worth adjusting the score. I think I remember when we talked about that, it was kind of like not going to be a big enough of an impact.
Yeah, I think that's right. We didn't find that by lowering the score, you would let a disproportionately higher number of effective teachers that were not passing than you were ineffective teachers who were not passing. So, yeah, it's not clear to me that that's necessarily the solution to this problem. You know, it seems to me like what we all want, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming from the way this conversation's going, we want something that not only that not only makes this barrier less burdensome, but actually equips the teacher. In the end, the teacher is better equipped to deal with mathematics instruction as they move forward. Like, that's the goal. Like, it's not just throwing a switch to say we're going to let 20% more people come in, which was lowering the test score, but actually doing something that we feel enhances their mathematic pedagogical skill,
Right.
or their content knowledge, either way.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, then that's a hard thing to try to figure.
It is. I've really been struggling on this. And even when I put in my homework on our Excel sheet, I ended up saying more than I'd planned just because it is complicated. I also think with things like, I just said, I think there's good evidence to support the approach that Ann said, but I think that, for those of us who don't do that now, there's going to be real resistance to that change. When you've worked really hard to back map a program, work on your curriculum, improve things for your students, we have a very high a TPA pass rate here compared to the state and nationally. And so there's going to be resistance from folks for that change. And so, if you're not making a recommendation that here's a set of options, I think unless you're saying everyone's going to do this, it's going to be complicated, the implementation of that. And that feels very much, and smiling, because that feels very much like when we were all still in pilot mode with TPA and we had these staunch, we will never do it. And, we were sort of slow for people, all the various EPPs to get on board. And so I'm not against that. I just think it's a realistic thing to think about.
Well, I think too, like it's an option, right? Like it could be an option, but somebody doesn't have to do the option because they could say, well, you're going to show this or you're going to show that. We're not going to line into that option.
And so if you had an option that was, let's just say, like the EdTPA math or the exam, would that be an option for EPPs to decide we're doing this or an option for individuals?
An EPP would have to decide if they're going to do this or that, depending on how they refer for licensure, but it's an option.
Yeah, right.
And if we're going to do the test, they've got to figure out some ways to support. The bottom line is if the test stands, which I think there needs to be some options there, but if the test stands, then EPPs have to figure out a way, all pass, that they're going to help these people with this test, right? Like you can't just say, go take the test. Like, good luck. We don't say, go take the TPA, good luck. Right? We do a lot of work around that. And I don't think we treat these licensure tests in a similar way. I think we do with literacy. I think we've learned that. I don't think we do it so much with math. I'm talking about the royal weight.
Right.
Right. But if we know that it doesn't really have an impact, then we need some options, right? We need to prepare, we need to give state boards some outs to say, it could, if TPA is an option, I'm just saying, if EVOS is an option, if it's within X amount of points of passing, so basically you're lowering the test score,
Right.
which
Yeah,
is
I
not.
think we have to face the reality that this is not an easy task. You know, I was
No.
very surprised by the results because I think we offer, well, we offer what I would consider to be a lot of courses / curriculum in comparison to some of what I saw in the chart. We also do test prep, we do workshops, we have like we provide a lot of support, and our students still do not perform to the level we would like them to perform.
Yeah, same. We still have 4 people haven't passed the math test, and I'm like, you take 16 credits, completely aligned, and like, so this is other stuff, right? So they need an out.
Yes, the math trauma is real.
The math trauma is real. So, but I do, I think I'm thinking from a traditional lens because that's what I do, right? But if you think from a residency lens, having these options of EVOS data, NECE's performance data, that's a great. NECE's I'm a little less kind of in line with because I think days are overrated, and I don't think I know we don't train people on that instrument. If we had a new instrument, I might be more palatable with that. I'd love to hear from the K-12 people about their thoughts on that one.
Me too.
Well, I will say, I think the problem with NESIS, and this is just a known fact, is, you know, as much as we want to think that every principal in a building is doing those observations and things, you know, unbiasedly, I think every building is different, and that's the challenge that you face with that.
I also think, you know, principals are under enormous pressure to keep good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and the incentive to go ahead and rate them highly to clear their license would be a pretty strong, I mean, I think it would be really tough on them.
Yeah, especially if it's like a teacher who's doing extracurriculars and coaching, you know, especially if it's someone who is
right
bettering the school as a whole. Yeah, maybe they have some classroom, you know, hey, let's work on this type of things, but sometimes some of that stuff outweighs the, hey, let's work on your classroom management. Because sometimes that's what the schools need, depending again on what county you're in and all that kind of stuff.
Dr. Winter, do you want to go through the summary of responses to think about what recommendations you'd want to then send to the full commission? Go through each bullet point?
The slide 8.
Yes, this slide that's up.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I was looking at my copy too, so I wasn't lost. This is
It's
the
all good.
summary of our subcommittee, and what people have recommended. So the lower cut score, which we've really talked about as being problematic, and it seems like we're not at a place where we're landing on that as a recommendation. The providing more options is the thing I think we've talked about the most, with maybe in my notes, I have 3 question marks after NESA's performance data, just because I think we're not sure. Some of the others, I don't know, like training and understanding, blah, 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 blah. I don't see how that meets the legislative requirement, right? Because it says that you have to achieve a prescribed minimum score on subtest or standard examinations. So could you even replace that with something like a training, PD, whatever it is. That doesn't seem like that meets the legislation to me.
Yeah, I think you need to be prepared that you might have to seek legislative support for some of your recommendations. I don't think you should shy away from that. But it does make it more challenging. It doesn't feel like, you've carried the ball over the into the end zone because you've got to wait for somebody else to do that for you.
Well, I think that's a good point. And Tom, like Ann and I said, I think there are EPPs out there that are providing a lot of support, curricular and extracurricular, meaning additional resources, and it's not necessarily yielding the results we would like. And so, that's the other factor to consider there.
So are we thinking probably no for the training?
I'm with Kim. I don't see how that's correlated. I mean, to me, that's like basic sit and get PD.
I agree.
It's not
Right.
like math competency.
Sure.
I have lots of thoughts. Aren't you glad I came to this meeting? No.
Well, and I just, no matter how many times I think about this on my own or us talking, it feels like we're not any closer to a recommendation. And it may be that we need more discussion at within the full commission, but, so things like test preparation, yes, we need to do that, but I don't see how that can be a valid recommendation, going a couple of bullets down, Kim, where it says test prep and BTSP.
This right here,
Uh-huh.
did you want me to strike that?
I think I have a different feeling about that. I mean, I wonder if we should say that we recommend that EPPs create, or the state creates, or the EPPs with the state create test prep. If we're not going to change the score and not get rid of the test, then I do think there's some recommendations. If we're
Right.
trying to come up with things that are, I mean, I'd much rather us to come up with a thing that is, it's the test or this, right? Like a or. But if it is the test, then I think there is some responsibility to kind of say, obviously, folks, just what we're doing is not doing it. We got to do something else.
Right.
Yeah, and to that point, Chair Bullock, I have said many times to the board in relation to limited licenses that you and the General Assembly are providing time. What these folks need is some kind of resource to help them learn this better or to understand it. Just extending the time is not going to produce any measurable outcome. And so I agree with you on this. Is like, I do think what I really like in here is that the BTSP. So I do think you incorporate K-12 into this. Like, it's the state, it's the EPPs, and it's the K-12s really focused on making sure these folks are getting what they need, and that as long as that requirement is standing out there, that is an articulated, that is a required element of what they do, either as they approach the end of their ed prep program, or as they're in their ed prep program, and as they matriculate into our K-12 schools, that we don't just lose sight of this, that it's this continuous level of support between the EPPs and the LEAs and the state.
Correct. I agree with that 100%. And, before when we were talking about the pressures related to NESA's data, we see that a lot. I mean, we still have our policy that asks candidates to pass all of their licensure exam requirements, and then we have an appeal process, and the licensure officer and I still get lots of phone calls of people very upset. How can you do this? The state gives them time, they're not required. But the longer that distance, it's easy for that to get forgotten, and it becomes harder and harder to support. And so we put resources out there and share that with the LEA as well as the principal, as well as the candidate and all those kinds of things. But it becomes more and more complicated the further they get away from us, if you will, in terms of really supporting. And so that's a big concern.
Yeah.
I'm your mean twin over here.
I also, so there's all this sort of talk about science and math and what's coming, what work we'll be doing curricular wise and what will be happening. And so I have had lots of thoughts about, are we going to end up making recommendations that conflict with what may be on the precipice? And I don't even know if there are any firm plans yet, but what's about to happen, and do we want to be in conflict with any of that? And that doesn't impact everyone in the same way. Like what we've done with Science of Reading has been, UNC system hot and heavy, not the entire state per se.
Yeah, I just don't, that's a great question, Dr. Winter, and I don't know the answer to it. I haven't seen, I mean, part of the issue for me is I haven't seen the body of research around this science of math that I've seen with the science of reading. Maybe it exists. I just don't know about it. So I just, and we don't know if that's going anywhere, but I think you can write something in that, we develop a plan unless, the state adopts a different strategy particularly for this. I think it's somewhat fine to move forward. It would be, as I say that, I'm thinking, okay, we plan all this and we get the policy done, and then they adopt something like science of mathematics, which would be great timing, because then nobody's really done anything other than create the pathway. But I know what will happen. We'll get all the way down that road and everybody will have moved heaven and earth to create this great program, and then something comes and sweeps it all away.
And hopefully we've learned a lot over the last few years about processes and but in many ways the target was moving and there were changes along the way, and that was very painful for folks. And so I mean, if I'm being honest, math isn't my area, but if I were a math faculty, I don't want to just speak for everyone, there's concern about what they've watched things with their colleagues and but maybe when we move forward and recommendations we make, maybe that helps guide that in some way, like you said, and it ends up not being an issue. It feels like, we're on these like sort of parallel paths, but not talking to each other. And I just worry about that.
Yeah.
So what about classroom performance when holding an emergency license or permit to teach license?
Well, and I didn't give that feedback, but I guess I'm wondering what that means. Are we talking about EVOS data? What is the classroom performance that we're talking about, and who determines that performance?
Yeah, as measured by, it has to have a as measured by.
I'm guessing the person that wrote it down is not here to provide more detail.
And to be honest, I mean, just anecdotally, that's often the phone conversation that I have with folks who, want the appeal and are upset. They'll say, well, I watched this person teach in their classroom and they're great with kids. And I don't disagree with that. But, again, I think it's got to be much more clear about as measured by what or how, what we're talking, what combination of things or what thing is the data
Well, to
point.
kind of piggyback on that too, Dr. Winter, classroom performance seems much more pedagogical versus content based, which is what you pointed out about the ed TPA piece.
Mhm. Right, unless you're just talking generally classroom performance, meaning how your students / classroom performs, right? It depends on,
Mhm.
we really need to know more there. So maybe a question, Chair Bullock, to you, because it feels like we're sort of at this, maybe a spot where we're unclear about, moving forward. What if we brought to the larger commission to talk a general recommendation of where we stand right now is options. So there could be these 3-4 options, and here's what we've really talked in depth about, but then also adding on the piece about, we think there needs to be this sort of resource piece of EPPs and K-12s together, this, test prep, for lack of a better way to say that. There are better ways to say it, but to have a broader conversation around that.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think we, yeah. And I would like, Dr. Tomberlin, if y'all could, poke any holes in any of our recommendations before they go forward, that would be super helpful to the group, I think.
Yeah.
So what I heard oh, go ahead, Tom, I'm sorry.
No. Yes, absolutely, we will.
Yeah.
So what I heard us talk about 4 options, one with question marks by it, but Ed TPA math, EVOS, or the Praxis sort of math test they're required to take now, or NESIS,
Yeah.
but this kind of has the question mark by it.
Yeah, I think when we ask for them to get rid of it, we should not put it back in. I don't think we wanna,
Yeah.
yeah, I wonder if the options, I wonder if we say something like the options are, provide options. And then here's some samples of options that we thought of.
Okay.
One of the options being the test. And then if the test remains as one of the options, that these other resource things need to.
I really kind of feel like the resource piece needs to be there no matter what. Because
Yeah,
there are
mean,
definitely going to be people.
This part right here, Kim, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That part. Okay, I'll bold that. And do you want to put methods courses separately from the Praxis Core Math Assessment by itself as an option?
Well, I don't think we want to list Praxis Core anything.
No. Do you want to just put the methods courses
Oh.
as an option?
It's still
and
not
I'm
a,
not I'm not
So-
sure.
I'm not sure.
Somebody said something and I missed it.
I think it echoed.
Oh, okay.
It was me. I was saying,
It feels like we've pushed on that in the past and have
Mhm.
always gotten back, and that's not really a strong measure of content.
I guess that would be more the test preparation down here.
I mean, certainly, I
Okay.
think that the idea of the test prep, it could happen a lot of different ways. Some EPPs already have modules that they require candidates complete as part of their preparation. Some could do that through their methods. I don't think we would necessarily dictate the how and when per se that people do it, but I definitely think no matter what recommendations we make, I like including the preparation for students to help them.
responsibility for that. So I think another thing is that I kind of think of this of like, if we're going to keep the test and the test be the only thing, or we're gonna provide options, right? So basically what we're kind of leaning toward here.
Like this part right here, right? Allow selection of different tests.
No, I'm kind of like up here somewhere, like in the middle of my head. I'm not on the screen. So,
Okay.
so if we keep the test and the test is, say the state board says, we're just going to keep the test is the only option. I feel like we need some options under that, like to say the test, the NECs plus, I don't know, Tom, I'm just going to use this language, one standard deviation below or X number of points below the passing score on the test. Right? So I think we need those options too, that say, if you want to just keep the test, then we need some levers to move, because if somebody's already doing well in the classroom, their test data shows they're doing well, but they haven't passed the test, we don't want to get rid of them as a teacher. What's some flexibility we can provide there? But we would really prefer to just provide some options. And maybe that's an option. Maybe it's the test at a certain level plus their NEC's data. Plus their EVOS data. We've talked about that before.
Yeah. I mean,
and I don't know what the magic is, but I'm just saying that's where we got to lean into Andy, I think. Or you.
well,
Go ahead, Tom.
yeah, so I always bristle a little bit when we want to use EVOS for something other than helping teachers grow and improve. But I do see, I see the logic in this. Like, if they're already growing their students in mathematics at a rate that's comparable to the average teacher, why are we pushing this? Why are we pushing this cut score so hard? I think that's a reasonable and valid kind of argument to present. Like, these are not. Go ahead.
I'm not. You're good.
I thought somebody. Well,
I think it echoed again, Tom.
yeah, our speakers are being weird. I think that's a great. I think that's a great stance to take, and it just. It feels like it increases the pressure of EVOS on teachers. But I guess it's not pressure. It's just giving them, we're allowing them to use something they already have. Like, they're getting EVOS, whether we talk about this or not. And so if they can leverage that for their benefit, that would be excellent. So I can see that way too.
Yeah, and so based on what you said, Tom, then instead of just saying something that we think isn't in our best interest or yielding good results, instead of just lowering a cut score, we could say, if, like what Ann was saying, if your score is whatever amount below standard deviation, whatever, but your students are performing at this certain level, then that may be okay. So it's using in that way.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the question for me becomes, we're still going to have an environment where people who are scoring substantially lower than even that one standard deviation and are not being effective with their students, they're still entering the system. And what are we going to do for them? Like, what supports do we provide to them to incentivize them to develop that content knowledge and their effectiveness so that they're serving kids better? I think it leaves off a chunk of folks that we still have to recognize.
Yeah, and I think, in my opinion, and I would love to hear from K-12, of course, because when I show up in these meetings, I have a lot of thoughts. So like for that group, I think they're the group that needs to go through some kind of mandatory training. That would be a good option for that group. Test prep and some mandatory training to then retake the test. Like, just quit taking the test every time you can take it just to try to get through it.
Right.
Do something to help yourself.
And that is literally what happens.
Yeah.
We're just going to keep taking it over and over again. because I'm surely
Right.
going to get there, and
It
I'm
was a
trying to figure out how to
scary
write
waste
my
of money.
letter that says this person is 4 standard deviations away from the mean. Statistically speaking, they're not going to be passing this exam. It's a concern. We should all be thinking about this and what the next steps are.
Right.
And I do want to be careful, when we talk about the language we use to talk about the test prep, we need to be very careful not to utilize language that makes it implied for EPPs only, because this is much bigger than us.
Yes, that's right. This is much bigger than us. But I do think that we could lean into some online versions of modules that could be quite helpful in test prep.
Mhm.
It makes us all exhausted to think about those, but I do think that.
Mhm.
What do our K-12 peeps think about that? Are there any left? Did they all go back to work?
This is Ida. I'm still here. Um, when I talk to my district specifically about the math, we're kind of in the opposite boat in our district. We are having great success with the passing of the math. We're not having a lot of success with the reading. So we are in an opposite boat.
Yeah, you need the training, you need the training for the reading, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like the sample questions and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And so, like, I'm just reviewing an email that one of the directors sent to me about this when we were talking about it. She said, in my work with our BTs, we've had very few that have not passed the math test. It is the reading foundations test that has been more of an issue for our district.
But so Ida, there's no extra support that the district's giving to help them pass the math exam. They just naturally pass it.
Well, the caveat is that our director for elementary education is also an instructor for undergrad math methods.
So you get the golden ticket. You got the golden ticket, Ida.
So she has that, she has that background and she can share that with our BTs.
Yeah. She's already built into the process.
Yes.
I see.
Well, and I think something that's challenging from an EPP perspective, when we start talking about the reading portion, we own that, quote unquote, meaning when we're talking about curriculum, we teach all of those classes, all of the content and all of the methods related to it, when that's not the case with math. Like, you can get a lot of what you need in the math methods, but they're also taking content classes from, math faculty that may or may not have any kind of pedagogical background or K-12 background. And so it's harder to really dig in and do that back mapping to prepare in that way, which is, like you were saying, you guys face the opposite of that. It's harder to dig into that later.
We've also had the discussion that the people that we're trying to train and become, the learners of the craft of math are the very ones that have gone through this exact same system themselves. And so it's really hard to try to fix an issue when the people that we're trying to get to pass the test or whatever the standard may be have gone through the same system over and over and over again, and there's been no change in it.
I have to say amen to that. We are trying to fix an institutional problem that's these folks have been subjected to. I need to be careful, but poor math instruction. I mean, for years and years and years, and then in the 11th hour, we're trying to come up with a way to solve this problem of a 20-year history of receiving poor or inadequate mathematics instruction.
Right.
Well,
And we look at,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hey, we can do it. We can do this. Like, we can, yeah, like,
so we look at, for example, EOG results are about 53% passing statewide. And if I looked at the Praxis scores statewide, the result is 51%. So the praxis results and our EOG and elementary results, correlate with each other. And I don't think that's necessarily a coincidence. I think if we could, like Anne was saying, have some tools in our belt that we can to assist these folks to better understand the concepts, whether it's to pass the test or EdTPA or whatever it is, the ultimate goal is to have the equipment ready to help to have a better understanding of all the math concepts.
Yeah. So do we
No
just
one
put it on Khan Academy?
Yeah, no one said this was easy. This is why we did this to a subcommittee. So we're gonna have options, and then even if the test is one of the options, then these would be some of the things we would suggest to start the conversation.
To
Is that
start
what-
yes. And I mean, one
Yeah.
of the things that we could do, since the whole subcommittee's not here, we could we'll shore up our notes and say, this is where we think we are. We can send it to our subcommittee and give them 5 business days to say, do you have thoughts to add to this or whatever? Just so everyone has the opportunity to weigh in if they'd like to.
Yeah.
I would feel better if you're okay with us taking that level of feedback to the large group, Anne, because I feel like we're not to a place beyond that as a group.
Sure.
The one thing we do, like a pragmatic task to talk about, is I'm going to be out of town, out of the country at our next PEPSC meeting. And so I am planning to be there and to do it, but we need to either plan for someone else to present this information or at minimum a backup. Because I just, I always worry, like, it's not a huge time difference. It's nothing like that. It just, you always worry about, will you have good enough service to speak in front of the group?
Right. So somebody from the subcommittee?
It could be, or if no one wants to, if you and I just pre-meet together,
Yeah.
you're like, no.
Well, I'm fine with, I would prefer someone from the subcommittee do it just because, but I'm happy to be the backup to the backup. What are you gonna say, Kim? You're gonna do it?
No, I'm not doing it. I think it should be a PEPSC member, but what I was gonna say is I can definitely arrange a prep meeting between the two of you. So then I can also take notes and make sure things are put together properly,
Yeah.
material wise.
Ida or Madison, would either of you be willing to be the backup potentially?
I'm actually not going to be in town during our next meeting. That's our spring break, and we've already planned out of town trip.
Good for you.
That's
Good for you.
That's why I'm in that situation as well.
Do
So
we
should
need
we
to
change
move the meeting? Are we gonna have quorum?
I can check about quorum. But outside of quorum, you know,
Um, I don't mind. I wasn't in the first meeting. So I definitely just want to make sure that I have all my ducks in a row if I have to present, recorded like to the whole state.
Madison, I can make sure you meet with Kim and
Yeah,
we
that's
can
fine.
brief you on everything.
And as long as I'm not like in the hospital in labor or something.
Oh yes, that's good detail though.
Oh, actually, you know what? We have an in-person district training that day, and it's supposed to be over at the same time that our meeting starts. So I may be late, but I should be there. So
I
just
have,
don't put me at the beginning.
I could put you last.
That would be fun. I'm probably going to end up just staying. We're meeting at the quarry we're doing a professional development day. So I will probably just sit in the corner of a room. It won't be worth it for me to try to get in the car to get home. So, I'll probably just stay put. I'm no good. I'm no good for that day. We should just move our meeting.
That's what I'm saying. If the people who are in this meeting and have the context of what's going on are not even going to be there.
Yeah.
You can't
think
meeting
you-
on that day. Yeah.
Or
Well, we
push it.
always said that presenting in March was like the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
Not knowing,
We were
No,
shooting
we can
for
just
that.
move it to, we can move the meeting. We're far enough out. We can move the meeting.
Yeah,
In
because now
March.
that I'm thinking, not that it's all about me, but now that I'm thinking about it, my cheerleaders planned a baby shower for me that day before our sports awards that evening. So I will have to be in. I'll be set enough to get attendance done, and then have to get in the car and drive back to Asheboro from Greensboro. So,
and it may not be a moving PEPSC per se. Maybe we just don't plan for this group to make our presentation with recommendations until April.
I hesitate because we're getting ready to get into this other thing that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And we've sat on this for a while.
Yeah.
And we need to move this forward.
Okay, so then I guess Kim's really gonna help you look at possibly moving that since we're far enough out. And then Kim will help us have a time that's me and Matt, like our prep meeting, so that we both are totally equipped with what we would be saying and presenting.
yeah, unless it's a day that you'll be good to be there. So, but
Exactly.
I'm good either way. I really there shouldn't be any like baby worries until like the week of April 7th, which conveniently is the week of our April meeting. So may or may not be good for that one, but that's all right.
Okay. And you can just let me know availability. I know that the 18th and 19th are they seem pretty open. However, I have to look at whether the state boardroom is available.
Let's do that now. Okay, hang on.
Would we be looking for a Thursday or any day of the week to change it to?
More than likely, it would need to be any day at this point because state boardroom could be used different days for different events or live streaming for different committees. And
shockingly, I could do the 18th or 19th. At this point, I'm like my whole schedule's in freaking nightmare, but I could move the things I have on either of those days.
actually, I think the state boardroom is used both of those days. There's a hold on it, but the 17th is available. It looks like I have to double check to make sure for certain and get approval for that. But it looks like on the actual state boardroom calendar that the 17th is wide open, which is a Monday.
Yeah. I'd have a lot of things I'd have to move, but I could do it. I'll also be in Raleigh the week after that, but that's the very last week of March.
That's harder because there's a lot of prep for state board that week. I mean, we could possibly have the meeting ourselves, but there's a lot of prep calls that then DPI staff need to attend. So some of us on the DPA side might not be
Maybe
able to
looking at the
attend.
17th.
Or even
What about the 20th?
The 20th. There is a subcommittee meeting that day. Actually, it would be this subcommittee.
Yeah.
So I could utilize that time starting at 10 a.m. and extend it for a PEPSC meeting.
I can do that. I don't know if you can, Ann.
I can. Yeah. That's spring break for me. That's a good day for me.
I think it skips a lot of spring breaks. It bypasses them. So if I'm gonna move Pepsi for March, I would go ahead and do it today. And
Okay.
just put a note in there that due
Ida,
to,
Madison,
The 20th
20th.
worked for me.
mhm. So starting at 10 o'clock, and I can book it for until 1.
Yeah, that won't take that long, but famous last words.
Works for me.
Okay, awesome. Because I already have it held.
Right. So you'll take care of changing that and putting a note or whatever to folks.
Yes. And so you don't need another subcommittee meeting, right, Kim?
Correct.
Okay. So
I mean,
we're all
unless
good
the
there.
body says no, whatever, we're pushing this back to you all, but it doesn't seem like it, no.
Okay, and I can clean up this slide and get it to you. And then if you want to clean it up further, if you have any other edits or you want me to,
I will.
you-
Then I'll send it out to the subcommittee and just say, this is
Yeah.
kind of where we landed today.
Mhm.
You've got until blank date to kind of give us more feedback if you have more to say.
and so we're thinking no on Nieces or yes on Nieces. Say that again, Anne.
I'm thinking no, and not unless it's coupled with something else.
Okay, especially this part, better align math assessment with the teaching expectations of meets or exceeds expectations in Nieces. Okay, I'm just gonna strike through, and then what about eliminate the mandate to pass the math test, instead provide as an opportunity to raise starting pay?
Yeah, I mean, I think you with the if there could be legislation like there is for EdTPA to do that, but it's a both and, not an either or. Right?
Yeah. I mean, one option could be to eliminate the test. I mean, they could eliminate the test, period. I mean, that is an option. They're not going to, but they could.
Yeah.
Would you want to leave that on as a recommendation, or do you want me to nix this?
I think we've not talked about us
Okay.
suggesting that. Because there isn't a sense that there would be support for that anyway.
And then this right here, eliminate the math assessment requirement as it does not support student outcomes, and consider what should replace the exam.
Well, I feel like the second half of that we've done with the options. So the exam's still an option, plus there are other options.
And did you want to allow selection of different tests? They were saying add additional tests on top of what we already have.
I mean, who decides that then? Who's the group that even goes and finds other options?
Well, actually, Pepsi would be ultimately the decision maker as far as sending a recommendation to the board if you wanted to add additional assessments. But usually what happens is then it goes to an expert panel as far as choosing the assessments to then recommend to Pepsi, to then recommend to the state board. That's what's happened in the past.
We already
We
have
do.
it. You can take the Massachusetts or whatever, the North Carolina version of the Massachusetts test, or the
Right.
Praxis CKT. We already have an or.
Right. We do.
I don't know what Praxis 5003 is. Does anyone know what that is?
Nope.
Like what that's
I
about?
think that's another math assessment that they have. It might be one that's mixed in. It wasn't a subtest. Because they have a couple that aren't actually subtests. They're also mixed in a multi-test.
It's an elementary subtest,
Yeah, it's
Okay.
mathematics subtest.
So that's a different one. And then classroom performance. You want me to strike that one?
Well, that one's only $64, at least. I don't know.
It's
not
the
better,
cheap
it's cheap.
version.
Yeah, the subtest.
Cheap option. Do you want me
If
to
you're gonna
take out
fail it, that's
classroom
the one to fail.
performance? Oh, sorry, Madison.
I was just joking. I said if you're gonna fail one and have to retake it, that's the one to
Mhm.
the less expensive one.
Kim, I think the answer is yes to striking them, because we were left that with the as measured by what. So,
Mhm.
and
Okay,
when you send this to me, I'll kind of work on language a little bit.
sure.
So,
Sure. These are ideas on here right now. Okay, I will move that to the Pepsi meeting to the 20th. I will clean this up and get it to you, Dr. Winter.
okay,
And then you'll send that off and we'll be ready for the March meeting.
perfect.
Okay.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Anne, for joining us, and everybody else for coming. We appreciate
Sorry for
it.
talking 90% of the time. Sorry about that. Lots to say about this
We
topic.
needed voices, Anne. You're awesome.
Okay.
Well,
I-
no, it's
and
good.
Madam
More
Chair,
voices
thank
is
you.
good. Nobody wants to be the only voice.
Right.
Correct. Correct. All right.
Well, thanks,
Thank
everybody.
y'all.
Thank
Appreciate
you. Bye.
Okay.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.